77 WABC.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Welcome to the weekend, and thank you for spending time here on this powerhouse blowtorch signal, Talk Radio 77 WABC. Proud to be broadcasting from the center of the universe, New York City, to the nation and the world. Welcome once again to a unique show called the Dr. Sky Experience. A show about the many mysteries from the realms of astronomy, space, aviation, weather, celebrity guests, and stories of American exceptionalism mixed in. And we like to call it a sort of a theater of the mind, a show where you can simply learn something new each week as we employ the techniques of critical thinking with dialogue. Reach out to us. The contact number, as always, proud to have you to come into our theater, 1-800-848-9222, or simply 1-800-848-WABC. And proud to promote, why not download the WABC app? Because once you're in the theater of the mind, imagine all the other rooms that you can explore in this vast broadcasting empire. So much for you on the WABC app. As always, the contact number, once again, 1-800-848-9222. And I want to thank our helmsman navigating this signal when you call in so that you're heard loud and clear across the nation and around the world. We thank Bill and tonight Ian for doing those particular duties that make this show and all these other shows so important, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's adventure, as we talk and continue about the dog days of summer. Just in case you missed it last week, the dog days of summer officially are from that period of time right around July the 3rd to August 11th. Named in honor of the brightest star in the heavens, other than the sun, the star Sirius, the magic of the dog star, a star that was so important to the ancient Egyptians, not only in the alignment of the pyramids, a great engineering marvel that may have had some outside help, we don't know. But during the beginning of their period, the agricultural cycle and the planting season, the star Sirius would rise around this particular time of year. They called it the heliacal rising of Sirius. In simple terms, it rose before the sun, and it was a marker. But we know the dog days of summer. Right here in Phoenix, the high temperature today, where I'm broadcasting from 117 degrees Fahrenheit. How about this, with a low tonight of 97 degrees. Humidity, some 18%, and a dew point of 58. And that is 58 degrees. Muggy. But what about your weather? What are the concerns that you may have, not only about weather, but about the climate? And in tonight's adventure, we continue with one of our most popular guests, Tom Harris, Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. And in simple but brief form, the International Climate Science Coalition is a nonpartisan group of independent scientists, economists, and energy and policy experts formed back in 2008. To promote better understanding of climate science and policy worldwide. The ICSC aims to create an environment in which a more rational, open discussion about climate issues emerges, thereby moving the debate away from implementation of costly and ineffectual climate control measures. The ICSC encourages assisting vulnerable peoples to adapt to climate variability and continuing scientific research into the causes and impacts of climate change. Mr. Harris lives and works in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, where his temperature is a balmy 65 degrees and clear. He has some 30 years' experience as a mechanical engineer, project manager, science and technology communications professional, and a technical trainer. He was the science and technology advisor to former opposition senior environment critic in Canada's Parliament from 2006 to 2008, and he was the executive director of the National Resources Stewardship Project in Canada. And with that, Tom Harris, welcome back to our journey in discussing climate. And in tonight's edition and episode, we'll get into a whole bunch of other topics because it'll be open forum later where people can ask their questions about many of the subjects that we'll bring together, from aviation, from space, etc. Welcome to the show. Thanks for being up here.
Yeah, it's great. 117 today in Nevada, in Las Vegas, eh? Wow. The record though.
Yeah.
Phoenix. Oh, in Arizona. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can tell I'm Canadian. I don't even know what state
That's
you're
okay.
in. But yeah, if I look up Arizona, the maximum temperature was 128. 128. It was
That's off the chart.
32 years ago in 1994. So it's nothing happening now that's unusual. Unfortunately, 117 it's not too abnormal for you, is it?
No, it's not, and it's really upsetting because not only our electric bill is going to be off the charts. Can you imagine when you plug in your electric vehicle? And who knows? We have one of the largest power plants just to the west of us, the Palo Verde nuclear power plant, which of course is now pulling in energy and transferring it to all other needy individuals and other cities. But the whole story, we begin with you, Tom, and it's so amazing to have you on these subjects because there's so much to talk about. And throughout this program, I want to also mention first as a host, your website, icsc-canada.com, because so many times when people call in, we want to refer them because of the limited time that we have. But you're a writer for so many different periodicals in the digital form. Talk about a few of those, because I think it's America Out Loud, which I think is where you highlight so many of your articles. Tell people about that, and let's dig into some of these climate issues that are perplexing to people. And I throw this question out to the audience. Do you really feel, ladies and gentlemen, that we've been hoodwinked on so many of the things? Naturally, many people may just say, well, of course. We want to keep it open and fair, because maybe there are people out there that totally disagree with the content. I would imagine wondering why, because you seem to present and always do a great job in presenting evidence. Because one of the main things I learned from listening to you is that we should listen to those that disagree with us. Please continue. I think you said something that's worth a lot.
Yeah, for sure. And, that was how I converted from climate alarmism to climate realism. I actually listened to a scientist, local scientist here in Ottawa, who doesn't want me to identify him because, of course, it's dangerous for people to speak out against the climate scare if you're still in academia. And that's why, of course, the main scientists who do speak out are people who are retired. But AmericaOutloud.news is where most of my articles are published. We also have a radio show there called The Other Side of the Story. And in the past couple of weeks, we've had some young people on. Actually, I was on vacation in Spain. And so my daughter, who's a master's of physics, she's pretty knowledgeable about climate as well. She interviewed Linnea Lukin from the Heartland Institute, who's a young engineer, actually, who works for Heartland, and Chris March, who works for the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow. He's their meteorologist. I think he's only about 25. So it's very encouraging to see young people actually speaking out against the climate scare and in favor of real environmental protection. Both of them spoke actually at Heartland's International Climate Change Conference 16 in Washington back in April. And, these are really outstanding people. I mean, I'm 73. I'm not going to be around forever. So I love it that these young people are picking up the torch.
Let's talk about something else here. And I want people to understand that we're being objective here, in your opinion, and I'm a good listener on this, at least I hope so. But give us, from the climate realism side, some of the issues that people should be concerned about, that you agree, because you're not denying things. You're talking in the terms of realism. So just before we get this interview rolling here, the engine and the steep climb as we go up a hill, and then we cascade over to the other side, give us some realism of problems that really do exist out there, so people don't think in your presentation we're going to be biased against anything that has to do with the term climate. Please continue on that. I think it's only fair to let that out of the bag.
Yeah, for sure. And, we're not climate change deniers. If anything, I'm a denial denier. I deny that I deny climate change. So, if it weren't for climate change, I'd be sitting under 2 kilometers of ice, because during the last glacial period, where I am in Canada, in northern United States, had, in this case, 2 kilometers of ice right above us. So thank goodness we have climate change. And in fact, we're in a very nice period right now called an interglacial. It only lasts for typically 5,000 to 10,000 years. And we'll be coming out of that and then enter into a 90,000 year glacial period, during which time we won't be able to live in Canada. So yeah, climate always changes, and there's no question that we have to help prepare for that. And a good example is the super El Nino that they're forecasting is now building in the Pacific Ocean. They're saying that they're saying that there's going to be record-breaking global temperatures, marine heat waves, more and more ice melt. So the bottom line is that, climate changes, and you have to get ready for it. The interesting thing is I was just in Europe, and they only have about 20% of homes with air conditioning. You have You have seniors' homes. You have hospitals that don't have air conditioning. It's ridiculous. In the United States, it's 90% of homes. So you have to get ready for climate change because it always will change. At times it'll get colder, but in the near future, it's going to get pretty darn hot because of this El Nino.
Yes.
So we really have to adapt to it and prepare for it.
Well, in Phoenix, not to be funny, we carry in, 120% of that. We make sure we even carry one on our back. At least we wish we could. But again, we choose to live in this environment. But let's talk across this far and wide radio broadcast network here, not only in the United States, but around the nation and the world. It's so interesting. And some of your articles that you write on, I'd like to highlight a couple that people can go to in greater detail. Climate alarmism and the mental health of young people. You write an article here on this particular website that we've been talking about here, America Out Loud. This comes to you and to the audience back in July the 22nd. So it's fresh. Give us the synopsis. It sounds interesting as to what you dig into here.
Yeah, that's right. Well, they've done various polls, especially in Canada, because Canada is still wrapped up in the climate scare. Happily, the United States is backing off of it, which is really quite wonderful. And there's some very good developments we can talk about later on that. But in Canada, they find that a very high fraction of young people are depressed to the point of clinical problems, where it actually interferes with their ability to live life because they're so worried about climate change. One of the impacts, of course, is that less and less young people are having children themselves. And one of the reasons, one of my sisters, for example, she told me until she finally realized there was no climate emergency, that she wasn't going to have children because, in fact, we had to save the earth from climate change. Vogue magazine, and we see this across a lot of left-wing magazines, Vogue magazine said the greatest act of environmental terrorism is having a child. So this is really a very serious thing. And in a way, it's a form of child abuse because they come through high school and they only hear one side of the story. My daughter, the physics major, she's actually 33 now, but she saw Al Gore's film, I think she said 5 times, over her high school career. Yes. So they don't expose you to the other side. And one of the main points we made in this article that you referenced is that there's plenty of information out there. There's one thing called the Climate Change Reconsidered series of reports, and people can check it out at climatechangereconsidered.org. And they've been putting out reports which bring together thousands of references and hundreds of scientists from all over the world that show that there is no climate emergency. And I have to give real credit to the Climate Change Reconsidered series, because as early as 2018, which is when one of their volumes came out, it was the one on fossil fuels, they said that the forecast that was being used to scare everybody and to generate all these massive headlines, which was a scenario of massive increase in coal use and therefore huge temperature rises, it's called RCP 8.5, they said point blank, this is ridiculous. This would require more than burning all the fossil fuels on the whole planet. You still wouldn't get RCP 8.5. So they pointed out as far ago as 8 years ago that this was nonsense. And finally, the UN has backed off and said, yeah, it's a ridiculous forecast because it would require increasing coal use by something like 5 times. And that simply hasn't happened. I mean, we've had a massive conversion to natural gas, for example. So, this is something people have got to look up, climatechangereconsidered.org. And what you'll find is that this is what the media have been ignoring forever. It's just as significant as the IPCC. It's put out by the NIPCC, which I always laugh at. It's not an IPCC. It's the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change. So that's what young people should be exposed to. They should be given the whole story then make up their own mind.
Our Theater of the Mind continues on the Dr. Sky Experience. Always great guest, as you tell us. My email, DRSKY, Dr. Sky, at WABCradio.com. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have questions for our special guest, who is he for the 2 hours of this particular, as we call it, tonight's adventure, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. All I ask is when you give us a call at 1-800-848-9222, that we at least try to stay on measure for at least these particular segments, because we will wander, right, Tom, into so many other subjects that you have some expertise in, and we'd like to share with the audience kind of an open forum as we move forward in the radio show. Climate alarmism and the mental health of young people. You've explained that to us. I think that's pretty interesting. Another article, just to give us a quick summation, and I'm going to read the headline, Beyond the Barrel, America's Oil Industry and the Road Ahead. Relating that to what you talk about. What's the details?
Well, that's interesting. That was an interview with Linnea Lucan, and she was previously a petroleum engineer. I guess she still is, although she's working for Heartland. And it turns out the United States, because of fracking, they've come across, of course, vast quantities of oil and natural gas. And the United States now is a net exporter of natural gas, or I should say petroleum in general. And this is because of fracking. Fracking has been a wonderful find. Back in Jimmy Carter's day, when you were importing a lot of oil from the Middle East, he put on his sweater and he said, we all have to conserve energy. But things have massively changed. A lot of people will say, well, fracking is dangerous. It's going to destroy the water table. You got to realize the water table only goes from about surface level, because, you have swamps and things, down only a few hundred feet. Whereas they're drilling for fracking, a mile down. I mean, they're way, way down below. And so this is a very safe technology. They have minor, so small you can't feel them at the surface. There's minor tremors, of course, because they're breaking up the rock to get the oil out of it. But yeah, the fracking is a huge boon for the United States. The Marcellus Shale, for example, in the northeastern United States. Yeah, well, that has really made the United States. Well, we don't really care. How much oil do we get from Iran? Almost none.
But Tom, in legacy media, though, see if you would agree with this statement. I've done the research too, but you have much more of a focus like a laser on this. Many in the legacy media do blame the whole concept of many earthquakes, somewhat severe, on the continuance of fracking. How would you respond? I mean, you just gave us the point that it's not really dangerous to the environment, and thus what? Not really setting off anything but minor quakes? Is that an effective, correct statement?
Yeah, that's right. You can measure them with instruments, but you can't feel them. They're very, very small, and of course, they're down a mile deep into the earth. They have to be sensible in where they're going to frack. You're not going to frack right on a fault line, for example. But generally speaking, it is extremely safe. They haven't really had any major accidents, and of course, the silly thing is you look at wind and solar power, for example. With the big storms that recently hit, I believe it was California, it destroyed many, many acres of wind farms. But you just don't have that with fracking. You don't have that with petroleum in general. So, and one of the things I find really incredible, they call it green energy. And if you watch Michael Moore's film, Planet of the Humans, you can see that wind and solar power, when you actually look at how they're made, with the cobalt from the children in the Congo and all the different minerals and things that are needed, and the huge areas that have to be used, 100 times more than a nuclear station, for example, you find that wind and solar are the least friendly energy sources on the planet. So the green energy label is just 1984 newspeak.
Well, there's a hell of a controversy over the whole windmill thing. I mean, that's for subjects that we could go into and spend many hours on. But are you seeing, from your research out there, that lots of people are just abandoning the wind concept? I mean, the ROI from that apparently is not what anybody thought, correct? Because if you don't get a steady wind, you just put up a lot of expensive stuff, and you're not getting your ROI. How do you dig into that deeper? What's the latest on that?
Well, it's interesting. A few years ago, Robert F. Kennedy, of course, who was a junior, who was a very strong climate alarmist, he's not talking about it now, but he's following Trump's directions. But he said, look, when you build a wind farm, you're building natural gas stations, because the wind only has a capacity factor. It only operates about 30% of the time. So 70% of the time, the wind's either too weak or it's too strong. So, there's a fairly narrow window that you can operate wind turbines in. So if you have something that only gives you power 30% of the time on average, you need to have a reliable backup. So you don't get away from fossil fuels anyways, because you need something that can ramp up and down quickly to compensate for the wind change, and that would be natural gas. Now, the problem, Dr. Sky, is that if you run a natural gas station at a continuous rate, you get high efficiency, low pollution. But that's not how these are being run. These have to go up and down, as if you're driving a car down the street at 2 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour. You're going to have terrible... Right. Yeah, you have terrible gas mileage. So the bottom line is you don't get away from fossil fuels. You just simply use the plants very inefficiently.
Well, let's do this. I'm going to be reading this. And again, I don't want the audience to think that I'm just a genius that may be purported, but that's certainly not the case. the concept of weather and climate. Let me just read this, and I want to get your definition further. Weather, the state of the atmosphere at a place and time with regard to heat, dryness, pressure, sunshine, wind speed, rain, etc. And moving on to climate, the average weather in a given area over a longer period of time, and let's say, and this is what I'm reading, over a period of 30 years. And there's 5 types of climate that people need to know about in your, of course, extrapolation. Tropical, temperate, arid, continental, and polar. What would you add to those that, from your side, studying it with the International Climate Science Coalition? Is that a fair and accurate reporting of what those are?
Oh, yeah, that's actually very good. And, that's why a single heat wave or even 5 years of heat waves doesn't prove climate change. You'd have to have that over decades because climate, of course, as you say, is a 30-year average. And the idea that we can control climate, I mean, this is a very far-fetched thing. There's one case where we can, and that is, of course, the urban heat island. When you cut down a forest and you build a city, you definitely affect climate in the local area, and it can change temperature by 5 degrees in comparison with the countryside. Atlanta is a great example of that. They can see it from space. But, climate is driven by many, many factors other than humans. And this is why they generally don't interview geologists, because geologists can look through the long history of the Earth, and they can see there were times when CO2 was not 50% higher, than today. And because, the 50% rise since about 1880, and people get all excited about that, but there's 1,000% higher CO2 levels millions of years in the past. And there was one particular instance, which this is what turned me around, quite frankly, when I saw this with the geologist who was my original mentor. 440 million years ago, there was a period that some believe was the coldest in Earth's history, when in fact even the oceans were perhaps covered with ice. They call it the ice ball Earth theory. And at that time, when it was very cold, CO2 was more than 1,000% of today. It was very high. So,
right. And I think you're referring to the Ordovician period, where again, 445 million years ago, or they say, rapid global cooling. Incredible, right, in that period. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And that's where we don't see any correlation between CO2 and temperature over the hundreds of millions of year type time frame. Because we can go back about 500 million years by analyzing seashells. They grind them up and they look at the ratio of oxygen isotopes, and they can see what kind of temperatures there are, and they have other methods to use proxies to measure CO2. The thing is, if you look at that 500 million year period, you find that there's no correlation between CO2 and temperature. It just simply isn't there. If you look at the last few 100,000 years, you find that, temperature follows, CO2 follows temperature. Right, so what happens is the Earth warms, typically because the sun is more active, and then the oceans give off more CO2. So centuries later, after the Earth is already warmed, then you see a CO2 rise when it comes to the last few 100,000 years. So the whole climate sort of mantra that we're being driven to a climate catastrophe by CO2, which is the main gas they're concerned about, the geologists just laugh. They say, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. And that's why they never interview them in the media.
Absolutely. And it's equally important. I just want to remind people, seats are still available in what we like to call the Theater of the Mind. We see your calls, like Tom in Boston, Greg in Michigan, and for all the others that would like to come into this Theater of the Mind. Why do we call it that? Because obviously you're not looking at a video screen. You're looking at what I call imagination. And yet, imagination with facts brings us to the Dr. Sky Experience. 1-800-848-9222. So many things to speak about, and with our special guest, as always, Tom Harris, Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. Check his website out, icsc-canada.com. So there's so much to get into, and hopefully even an hour or two, if you don't mind, Tom. I'd like to get into some of the other subjects that I think are fascinating for people, such as the launch today. I'm shifting gears on you. Starship, number 13, successfully launches from Boca Chica, Florida. It does something interesting. We'll save that for later. And also talking about solar activity that's going very strong. And also a little bit of a conversation with you and myself and the audience, most important, about the legacy of Apollo 11, some of your stories, some of my stories. But what's more important, it's the stories of everybody out there who come to the Dr. Sky Experience. 1-800-848-9222. And like I mentioned before, why not go ahead and sign up and download, that's the modern technology word, download the WABC app, where you can find so many different rooms to go into that you'll find not only about this particular radio show as we are live, but you'll learn about so many of the other great hosts that adorn this radio station. A station, folks, that is well over 104 years of age, heard in 173 countries, all 50 states, and I'm sure even out to the cosmos. We'll be right back as we excite you during the dog days of summer as we continue to move through time and space. I am Steve Cates, Dr. Sky. We'll be right back.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Listen closely to the cosmic wind. Every atom in our bodies was once part of a dying star. We are not just looking at the universe. We are the universe, looking back at itself, made of stardust, destined to return.
The energy of Dog Radio 77, WABC, moving through time and space. Our special guest, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Client Science Coalition. He's with us for the entirety of the 2 hours. Let's go to the callers. They've been very patient. On line 2, we welcome Tom into the theater. He's in Boston. Good morning. Thanks for being up with us.
Thank you, Dr. Sky. You and Tom are great. Listen, I've always been a skeptic of this. I believe it's a money-making deal for people like Al Gore. But
Okay.
What bothers me the most, Dr. Sky, if you could speak about this, I understand because of air conditioning, no air conditioning in Europe, I mean lack of, tens of thousands of elderly citizens in Europe are dying. Is that true?
I don't know, but I'm going to go to Tom on that because that's his area of expertise. But stay with us, Tom. Let him respond on this. Yeah, this is good.
Yeah, they've gone through various phases where thousands of seniors have died because of heat waves. Because, of course, what happens in France, for example, is that in Paris, the young people and middle-aged people, they leave the city. It's too hot. So you end up with a lot of seniors without their family around to help them. And if they're living in non-air conditioning environments, then indeed, it's a very serious risk. In some parts of Europe, they don't even have air conditioning in hospitals, if you can believe that.
That's amazing.
20% of homes in Europe have air conditioning. In fact, it's interesting. I got there and I stayed at an Airbnb, and they didn't have air conditioning, and it was 31 degrees in my bedroom, which, of course, for a Canadian is pretty hot. And so,
Celsius. There you go.
Yeah, that's right. Being jet lagged, I guess that's 100 or something. Being jet lagged, I lay in bed with an ice pack on my head until I eventually caught up on my sleep. Then I kind of got used to it. But it's really a problem. I mean, air conditioning is a critical thing, especially in hospitals. And I don't have the exact statistics, but if you look at the number of people who've died over the last few years because of heat in the elderly community, you're talking about thousands of people. And of course, the opposite is true. The opposite is true as well, Tom. In the United Kingdom, they have an axiom, they say, or a slogan, they say, for seniors in the winter, it's eat or heat, because electricity prices have gone through the roof because they're trying to stop climate change.
That's horrible.
So you have so many thousands of seniors in homes in the United Kingdom who are literally either starving themselves or freezing to death. So the climate scare has serious consequences, but it's not climate. It's the fact that we're not prepared for it.
From Tom to Tom, we go back to Tom in Boston. You have another comment? Because I hope he answered your question. I think it's amazing what we all heard.
Absolutely did, Dr. Sky. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate you very much.
Well, thank you, sir, for your kindness, and I hope you'll join us again as we continue to talk about these experiences. And what's the goal, Tom? I like to say this over and over. We learn, hopefully, something new, and I say that with absolute respect to our guests and the callers. on every particular show that we try to push out in this vast audience that's out there from Talk Radio 77 WABC. Let's continue with the callers. Line 1, we go to Greg in the state of Michigan. You're on with Tom Harris. Good evening to you. How are you doing, sir?
Dr. Sky, Mr. Harris, Mr. Positive, boom, shakalaka. I got to ask you, when we talk about weather, I read philosophical books, and they say that when a butterfly flaps its wings, how does it affect the weather? And it does it. Do things that nuanced, that little minutia, create an effect that causes weather and climate change?
Interesting. Really?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, theoretically, everything affects everything, if you go to the microscopic level. But, one of the things that they're starting to conclude is that the Earth system is not a fragile system on the verge of on a knife's edge, about to fall over. Patrick Michaels, who was Cato Institute and also with the University of, Virginia, he said that the new paradigm is a robust Earth paradigm. Because if, in fact, small changes to temperature, for example, or big changes to CO2 was enough to drive the Earth to catastrophe, it would have happened many times in the past. So very fortunately, most of the feedbacks in nature are negative. In other words, you get a certain effect, but then nature dampens that effect. Okay, so you don't see an acceleration where, as you say, a butterfly flapping is going to eventually change the climate. What you find is that nature is very smart. It has a negative feedback which dampens things long before you have a runaway. So the truth is we've got a robust Earth, a very robust Earth, and it's a darn good thing, because otherwise we would have gone to hell in a handbasket when CO2 was 1,000% of today's level. So yeah, it's
Amazing.
A very robust environment, fortunately.
Well, Greg, in Michigan, here's something interesting I wanted to add, as Tom explained it in great detail. A friend of mine who passed, Dr. Edgar Mitchell of Apollo 14, we sat together, and I didn't realize, other than his one singular trip to the moon and his moon walking with our first American in space. And he told me something interesting. He was part of a group called the Nowack Institute, and people should look this up.
Yeah.
He said to me, and you probably know this, Tom, but just to share, and maybe Greg knows it, what you were saying, Greg, about the flapping of a butterfly's wings having more causation to other things like storms, maybe typhoons, hurricanes. He said to me, look up something, Steve, he said to me, that we've come up with called the quantum hologram. And I scratched my head and I said, boy, that's a lot of words to get out. What is it? And he said that in simplicity terms, Greg, everything in the universe that we have, and particularly here on the Earth, every single thing that every little thing does has some sort of like a long connected line. So if you could see it, it would be just amazing how everything simply is interconnected. Isn't that amazing, Greg? It's amazing stuff.
Very much. Love you, Dr. Sky. Everybody go for your dreams.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I add something to that? Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because so often people say, the Earth is this lonely little sphere in the middle of the vast universe. Well, in fact, the universe and the Earth are hugely connected. We're connected to the stars in many, many ways. For example, when a supernova goes off in a distant part of our galaxy and eventually the galactic cosmic rays get to Earth, they ionize air molecules to produce clouds, and the clouds cool the Earth. So Earth's climate, believe it or not, is partly controlled by supernovas hundreds of light years away. So we're actually part of a very dynamic and very much involved universe. It's very much evolving, and I love that little intro you had to this section of the program, because there's a scientist I worked with. He's an anthropologist, and he's largely an anthropologist of the future. He looks at where is humankind going in space. Okay, what impact will it have on our consciousness? What impact will it have on the universe? And he's also one of these people who say that humankind, our sentience, is the way in which the universe comes to know itself. Because otherwise, if there's no other sentience, although that doesn't seem probable, then the universe is just a dead sort of existence. But as we move into space, he maintains, this is Dr. Charles Laughlin, an anthropologist, he's currently living in Washington State, he's told me, he says, look, we're going to see a massive evolution of consciousness where people will change They'll come to respect their environment more because, of course, they'll come to appreciate how special the Earth is. And that was one of the main impacts on the Apollo astronauts, Edgar Mitchell in particular.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. We have many, as you referred to that rejoiner. We've put together a number of these, and you'll hear them throughout the various shows that we do. The voice is great, but the concept of what it's talking about is we're all stardust, and every molecule and every atom in our body is simply that, as you're explaining. So hopefully, right, Tom, maybe someday we'll learn to all get along. Maybe wars or craziness will be something of the past. Kind of interesting.
Well, that's right. And there's something they call the founder effect. And this is so cool. I got to tell you, I know it's not climate, but it's...
No, go ahead. We're going to have an open forum on that in many ways. This is not just into one topic.
Well, the kind of people they choose to go into space are people who are very cooperative. They can work together well in a group. They're intelligent. They're healthy. This is a special group of people. So as they move into space, they'll be establishing colonies with the very best of humanity. Now, the interesting thing is that when their children grow up, they, of course, will be spacelings. They'll be used to living in space, and they'll be the ones that expand out further. But there's something interesting in evolution, and this is an interesting feature that anthropologists know about. It's called punctuated equilibrium. You know, if you keep everybody in one mixing pot, you don't see evolution happen very quickly, either in consciousness or biological evolution.
Right.
But when you have a small group of, in this case, very healthy, very cooperative, very intelligent people move into a new environment, they change quite quickly because they have to learn to adapt to the new environment. They learn new characteristics. They learn new ways of thinking, and then they influence the people, the population from which they came. And you see that all through history, you know, biological and geological history. You see that this punctuated equilibrium have stability. You know, all of the particular species stay in a particular ecosystem, and they don't evolve very quickly. But then some brave ones go off and learn new things and evolve quickly to adapt to a new environment. Then they influence the whole. So what Lachlan is saying is we're going to see a big advancement to human consciousness and generating all sorts of things that we need today, such as the ability to be cooperative instead of fighting each other. We're going to see this accentuated, an evolution of consciousness as we move into the cosmos.
Sure.
So it's much more than spin-offs, I'll tell you that.
Well, Tom, what you said is true, and again, not kissing up here, but to be reality-wise, as you talked about before, it's important to listen to those that disagree with us. And the sad, death almost a year from now, or saying time-wise, of Charlie Kirk. What did he do? He sat and listened to people, tried to be, open-minded and critical thinking, even the worst of the worst. But the point is, maybe that's a step toward humankind, maybe trying to reach some goals that we're talking about here, not only in the climate world, but as we explore other civilizations or other locations in the solar system. We, of course, want to be optimistic about it. Tomorrow night, as we shift gears on the Dr. Sky Experience, we have some other interesting guests. We're going to talk about in detail. I'll leave that to later in the program to tell you who it is. We're going to be talking about individuals that are in the privatized area of space and the building of different rockets, and they are on the right path because so many of these young entrepreneurs are doing amazing things that NASA couldn't achieve, even though they did great things. We'll be speaking for 2 hours with an individual who's looking to put space mirrors up above the Earth, beaming down sunlight to certain regions on the Earth. And, of course, there's controversy in that, too. But stay tuned tomorrow night on the Dr. Sky Experience as we move upward and outward, talking about space capitalism and the privatized side of the discussion. We'll be right back with your questions and comments. We see Melvin in Indianapolis, Martin in upstate New York, and Robert in Philadelphia. And you, as there's plenty of seats inside the Theater of the Mind, 1-800-848-9222. We will be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Hi, this is Mark Morano, author of The Great Reset, Global Elites and the Permanent Lockdown. You're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience on WABC, New York.
The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. That, a quote from Shakespeare's comedic play, As You Like It, for many in the entire world to think they have all the answers, but they may not. It's also known as the Dunning-Kruger effect. As we continue at 48 minutes after the hour, Tom Harris joins us for the entire show. That is 2 hours, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. Thank you, and welcome back, Tom. Let's continue with the callers. Line 3, Melvin in Indianapolis. You're on the air. How are you?
Dr. Sky, I want to talk about natural solar energy.
Okay.
When I was in third grade, I learned that the sunlight hits the leaf of a tree, and the sunlight gives nourishment to the leaf, so the leaf can make nourishment for the tree.
True.
So the sap that goes up and down the tree is like the blood for the tree, and the solar energy that goes into the leaf goes into the sap. That energy makes the tree grow.
Yes.
I learned that in third grade.
You're right.
40 years later, you get a chainsaw. You chop the tree down, and you make a little bonfire in the back of the house. And you get a stick and some marshmallows, and you cook samosas with the wood that's burning.
Sure.
When you stay by the fire, you feel the heat of the fire. That heat of the fire is solar energy. The tree is a battery that stored the energy for 40 years. When you light the match, you're now releasing the energy that was stored for 40 years.
Well said,
So
Melvin.
burning
You're
wood
exactly
is solar
right.
energy.
You're right. It's like a kinetic thing. But, Tom, this is interesting what Melvin brings up. It's a whole process. And this process from solar energy and solar particles, light, continues. Describe that to Melvin, because I think he said it better than I could ever say it.
Well, yeah, he did. He said it very well. When sunlight hits the leaf, it triggers photosynthesis, which is energy absorption. And it's interesting because what they have are green pigments inside chloroplasts, which catch the light energy, and it stores it. I mean, you're totally right. And in fact, the same thing is with coal. And, you know, they're basically a battery from millions of years ago when the plants were growing that eventually turned into coal. So, yeah, we actually have solar power when we burn our fireplace.
Interesting. Melvin, appreciate the excellence. We need more like that, and I appreciate you. Hope you'll continue to be part of our Theater of the Mind. Thank you for joining us. Let's continue to go to line number 2. We say good morning to Martin in upstate New York. You're on with Tom Harris. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Dr. Sky. I don't know how you live down there. It's over 100 degrees, you say?
Well, it was 106 when we started the show, and that is we're a 3-hour time difference. We're on, I know, figure this out. It's even crazy. Arizona doesn't go on daylight saving time, so we're California time. So it was 3 hours. We were at 106, and I haven't checked lately what it is. But you kind of get used to it. Yeah.
I like that you don't do that daylight saving time. That's independence. Don't do it. Don't do that.
Well, there's going to be big changes coming. I think if the Senate approves the bill that passed the House, you're going to hear some amazing things come about that. A lot of people are against it because they don't want little children out there in the dark in other times of the year. But please continue.
Well, I used to work early in the morning. I worked early in the morning. I like to have go back to standard time when I was working outside, and I would rather work in the cold than the heat of the summer. It's hot enough in New York. I tell you.
And tomorrow we're supposed to be at 118. How about that, Martin?
Oh, geez. Wow. Anyway, Dr. Harris or Tom Harris.
Tom Harris.
You seem to know he seems to know what he's talking about, and in my opinion, my personal opinion, is that man-made climate change is sort of a gateway lie that the globalists use. If they could sell you on man-made climate change, they could. If you would buy that lie, then you'll believe in men can be women. You could believe in. Or
the next vaccine, right? The next vaccine that you better take, right? Right, Martin? That would be it. The next vaccine that you must take because we know better than you, but that's another subject.
Yeah, they know better than all of us. Oh, yeah. They'll tell us exactly what the... Like Mandami in New York, here in New York City. Thankfully, I don't live in New York City. I'm upstate, but I hear all about him. He knows better than everybody else. It's incredible.
Well,
I mean, I can't believe these people. I can't. You know what? When I was in school, there was a sort of an artist depiction of the Cretaceous period, the Jurassic period, with the flora and the creatures that existed. So you got a sense of the climate at the time, and you got a sense of climate change. Climate changed over time. And I bet you today they don't even teach that in school. They just tell you in school.
Well,
when you go
Martin,
to school.
No, I hear you loud and clear, but why don't we jump in before Tom? I want to give Tom a fair chance at, responding here. But that's why I continue when we talk about our American exceptionalism concepts, because, I did military, and a lot of people did. I did some law enforcement, a lot of people did. But here, not to be on a soapbox, I believe so strongly in the concept of truth, justice, and the American way, even though I go into the realms of science. But here's the thing I say. I'm against anything, and I think Tom would agree. You've said it pretty clearly, Martin. Anything that takes away freedom and liberties from individuals, I'm 100% against. And I would think you would agree. But, Tom, let's jump into that. I think Martin makes some really good points there about what's happening.
Yeah, he's right when he says it's a gateway drug. Climate change, obviously we cause a small amount of climate change. And, it's interesting, William Happer, he's put out papers that show that with a doubling of CO2, you're not talking about a very large temperature change, perhaps a degree over a century. But, the interesting thing is that the consequences of the climate scare are that the government can control more and more of society. And one of the best examples is these 15-minute cities. In Oxford, England, they just went nuts on this 15-minute city. You get a fine if you go from one part of the city to another with a car, unless you've had a certain, if you've gone more than your share of times. They want to restrict air flights. They don't want anybody to fly, of course, except for the delegates that go to the massive climate conferences, which is a bit ironic. But the whole climate thing is driving a reduction in our freedom. And I'll give you another example. For example, if you force wind and solar power on society, the only way that you can make it work is if you have massive government subsidy. So what it means is the government becomes in charge of your energy infrastructure. If you have coal, for example, you don't need any government subsidy. It's a solid energy source. We have, hundreds of years of coal ahead of us to use. If we use proper pollution control, it's a very clean source as well. We don't need government control of coal. It's just a great source. Same thing with oil and natural gas and nuclear. It requires a lot more government support because the cost is huge, and of course it requires decades to build up proper nuclear infrastructure. But yeah, you're right. It removes freedom. That's one of the main consequences of the climate scare in so many ways.
Well, Martin, I appreciate you, and thanks for being part of our show. Spot on the subject matters, because again, I believe deeper than what we're talking about here when we talk about science, which is our main topics. The sky and the wonders of the universe, learning something new each week, I hope, is that freedom and liberty. Don't take it away from me, and certainly not to have the people out there listening have that taken away. We could get into other side, tangential is the word, conversations. But for now, I just want to mention something before we go to the top of the hour. If we don't get Robert in Philadelphia, Tony in New Jersey, Jim in the Catskills, and Frank in the Bronx on, obviously, during this short first hour, if they're kind enough to stay on the line, we'll do everything we can to get you on the air. So, Tom, one of the major things is this big CO2 myth, and I think you were alluding to some sort of a video, and tell us about that, because the lengthy part of that, people should watch the video to learn the truth over history about how CO2 is not this toxic gas that's going to wipe out the earth. Quite the opposite, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Martin Durkin, who originally he was the director of the film The Great Global Warming Swindle. I believe it was back in 2009, and boy, that sure raised a lot of hackles, but it was a really excellent film, quite frankly. He's come out with this new one on CO2, and there's on the Guerrilla News Network, when he works with this particular group, Willie Soon, he's an astrophysicist. He works with them as well. They've put out a really excellent video, and people should go to, I believe it's called Guerrilla News. I'm not sure exactly, but the bottom line is this video is wonderful, and he shows the statistics. He shows how the temperature now is actually lower than it's been for most of Earth's history, and CO2 is also lower than it's been for most of Earth's history, and that the two do not go up and down together. And Martin Durkin shows this extremely well.
Interesting. So much more with Tom Harris, Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition, talking with us, not at us, about so many of the things that are happening in the world of climate. He talks about climate realism, just so as we end hour number one, we want to make sure that we're not, he's not dissing the entire concept of what's happening with climate. He's trying to offer some honest solutions from people that have great knowledge about this. And again, your calls and your questions about these subjects, as many people are waiting to get in on hour number two, 1-800-848-9222. And Tom, we always do about a minute here before we go to the break. We talk about the things in the heavens. So if you're out there and you have clear skies over the next few days, and particularly right now, the moon is next to a star in the constellation Scorpius called Antares. If you see this reddish object to the side of the moon, that star is some 500 million light years away. And what we're seeing is the moon moving on to its full phase, the full thunder moon. We'll be back with hour number two, how time flies through time and space on the Dr. Sky Experience.
Always look to the sky. The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Thank you for inviting us into your homes as we spend part of your weekend with all of us. Here from the Powerhouse Blowtorch Signal, Talk Radio 77 WABC. Proud to say it often, broadcasting from the center of the universe, New York City, to the nation and to the world, and probably even out to the cosmos. We call it a theater of the mind, where obviously we hope that you and I and everybody else will learn something new with our great guests about these realms and the great mysteries of the universe, from astronomy, space, aviation, weather, and celebrity guests and stories of American exceptionalism. The contact number to get into the theater of the mind, as we like to call it, 1-800-848-9222. And always proud to say it, why not download the WABC app? Because if you're in our theater of the mind, there are many other rooms that you can explore and listen to this particular show and all the other great hosts that permeate the airwaves here on WABC. We want to thank our helmsmen, Bill and Ian. And now we continue with our special guest in hour number two, Tom Harris, the Executive Director of the International Climate Science Coalition. Welcome back, Tom. Always an experience with you that's very positive, and just by a number of people calling in. Let's continue. On line number 4, he's been patient. Robert in Philadelphia. Good morning to you. How you doing, sir?
Hi, Dr. Sky. As always, it's good to talk to you. Loving the show as always, and I really appreciate the great guests you get, like Mr. Harris. I had a couple questions. Well, a quick question and then a forward-looking question. My quick question is, what are CO2 levels now, and at what level do plants start to die? Number one, because I've always thought we needed more CO2 myself. But the second question is, you were mentioning the interglacial period that we're in, and I'm wondering if maybe human activity might alter a small dynamic, or future technology might be employed to forestall or mitigate the next ice age.
Wow.
Powerful stuff. Yeah, really good questions. Right now we're just over 420 parts per million. That's still a trace gas. That's, very, very small. But if you get down to as low as 150, that's when plants start to die. We got very close to that during the last glacial period. It got down to about 180 parts per million. So, it's interesting because Patrick Moore, who was one of the founders of Greenpeace. He changed sides. He's now on our board of directors, believe it or not. But Dr. Moore, he has a PhD in ecology. He actually shows that CO2 levels have been dropping gradually over millions of years. And if humans had not come along and started to liberate CO2 with fossil fuels and cement production, he says that we would have seen the end of life on Earth. Because if you follow the trajectory down until we started to increase it, it was heading to below 150 parts per million. Now, it wouldn't happen tomorrow, but he says we saved life on Earth because the natural cycle was bringing it down to 150 or lower in the not too distant future. So, yeah, CO2 is, at times in the past, it was 1,000% of today's levels. So we're still very low in comparison with most of Earth's history. What was your other question?
Yeah, go ahead, Robert. I don't think he heard it.
It was whether or not current human activity might alter one of the dynamics, or if future human technology might be used to forestall the interglacial period.
Yeah, that's a really good point. In fact, it's interesting that, various scientists, Zelakovitz out of England, she's originally Russian, and others, out of the Pulkovo Observatory, Abdusamatov. These people are saying that we're actually headed into global cooling because of cycles of the sun, and that around 2060 we're going to see a cooling era. But because of our CO2 emissions causing some warming, it probably won't be as severe as it was during the 1700s when we had a solar minimum then as well. But looking even further to the future, the speculation is that our CO2 emissions may delay the onset of the next glacial period. So that's a very good thing. Trying to stop the glacials entirely is going to be maybe impossible because they're driven by something called Milankovitch cycles, which are changes in the orbit of the Earth, the tilt of our planet's axis.
This is true.
Axis, and of course this wobble. So what you end up with is this 100,000-year cycle that we're currently in between glacial and interglacial, and that's being affected by the orbit of the Earth and the way the Earth moves on its axis. So I don't think we're anywhere close to being able to affect it in the long term.
And I think, Robert, to add to this, what Tom is saying, look up the terms nutation and precession. These are astronomical terms, which we don't go into in great detail for the lack of time, but they're also indicative, as you're telling about these Milankovitch cycles, all things in the heavens. This whole thing of celestial mechanics, the Earth's orbit is not the most perfectly circular of all the planets. Venus has that, but there's many other changes. But, Robert, more important than what I just said, thank you for being part of our show. You always bring something interesting, and we're all trying to learn something new. So thank you, my friend. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Let's continue on. We go to line number 1, Tony in Clifton, New Jersey. She's a regular caller. Tony, good morning to you. How you doing?
Hi, Dr. Sky. When you gentlemen were talking about global warming, the first thing that popped into my mind, and I want your comments on this, both you and your guest, is first of all, heating was discovered. This is what it says on my computer, 1.9 million years ago. And 42,000 years ago, people would do the hearth-style heating, and they'd put it in a hearth. Air conditioning, on the other hand, was discovered in 1902. And then I remember, as I was growing up, well, before that, in the 20s and 30s, it became more popular for the homes. And then by the 70s, everybody had it. So there must be something to why it took so long to get air conditioning if everybody was so hot.
Well, Tony, not to cut you short, we'll talk Phoenix. I didn't believe this. I'm a native New Yorker, and I lived out here for about 37 years. And I asked people, I said, when did they start installing air conditioners? And the person said, here's what we did. And this is now talking about 60 years ago, maybe. People that didn't have a lot of money, let's say. They took wet sheets and towels or big bedspreads, They wet them and they hung them over the side of their, homes, over their patios. And people would sleep out there. And if any breeze came through with that moisture in there, that was air conditioning. But you bring up some good points. Tom, not to steal your thunder on this, Tony always brings up some good points.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, humanity has lived through hot periods, for many times. In fact, the medieval warm period was warmer. The Roman warm period was warmer. It's cold that we really have to worry about. If you look at history, that's when it was, in fact, famine and wars and all sorts of things came. They actually did a study recently in the UK. It was published in the Lancet, the medical journal, and they looked at millions of deaths across the world through many countries, many climates, and they found that 20 times more people die from the cold than from the heat. So if we get a bit of warming, which we probably will because CO2 is rising and it causes a little bit of warming, that's actually a very good thing. Now, the interesting thing also, Tony, is that the warming is forecast to happen most in the Arctic at night in the winter. So what that means is that instead of being minus 80, it's going to be minus 75 in the very coldest parts of the Earth. And I don't think that's a bad thing, quite frankly.
Interesting. Tony, thank you. You always bring up some good points here, and I appreciate you as being a regular caller to the Dr. Sky Experience. You have a good weekend. Let's continue. We're being inundated, and that's a good thing in the theater of the mind, right, Tom? Let's continue. Line number 3, Jim's been patient, and he's in the Catskills. How are you this morning?
Good evening, Dr. Sky and Tom. Two things. One's a thought that I've had for a long time. The second one actually concerns me a lot. But anyway, the first one is, how come they can't have a perpetually charging electric vehicle with, say, alternators on each wheel and a solar panel on the roof that constantly charges the battery?
Interesting. I never thought of that. Wow.
Well, you need an incredibly big solar panel, that's for sure. It's funny. We bought some solar panels to charge a battery that we have. We have a 100-pound lithium-ion battery, and it's great. It runs your refrigerator for something like 7 days. But the bottom line is we have to have, it must be about 20 square feet of solar panels to charge it in the course of a day. I mean, so if you're trying to run a car with solar power, you'd probably have to have a solar panel about 20 times bigger than the car. So I think it would be pretty cumbersome.
Well, it's funny, Jim. We had a Tesla at one time, one of the earlier models. I think it was, an Tesla S or something. And the reason we didn't like it, the seats in the car, not to knock Tesla, at the time, they just weren't as comfortable as other seats. But here's the point. That car, look how long it took to charge it, right, Tom? Right, Jim? It's amazing. I wonder, does anybody have any information on how quickly you can now charge these EVs? Because, again, it's not as quick as putting, liquid fuel, gasoline, in your car. I wonder, any idea, Tom? Have these batteries improved at their recycle time or recharge time?
They've improved a little bit, but one of the major problems is it takes so much longer to charge an electric vehicle than it does to just fill up with gasoline. They're going to actually have big problems with respect to the area required for charging stations. I mean, a car goes in and 5 minutes later they drive out, their full tank of gas, and they continue their trip. If you have to go into a place and charge for, say, half an hour to an hour, then you're going to need massive areas to cover, parts of cities to charge cars. They're just going to be sitting there for a long time. And so, in fact, we did an analysis for Ottawa and found that there simply isn't enough space in the city to have all these cars sitting there charging, because it doesn't take 5 minutes to charge like gasoline. You take a half hour to an hour. So you have to have massive parking lots of charging vehicles all the time.
Absolutely. Jim in the Catskills, a follow-up from you. You've been patient, and thank you for being with us. Please continue. I guess he's not there. Well, let's continue. Line number 5, the callers continue to come into the Theater of the Mind. Frank in the Bronx, you've been patient. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, Dr. Sky. Hi, Ms. Harris. I love your show. I'm calling your show.
Thank you.
A couple of things, couple of comments, okay? You always hear, Earth is going to turn into Venus if you don't ride a bike to work, or if you don't have an electric car.
Right.
But, I always hear that. So, electric cars create more carbon dioxide than gasoline, because you have to burn coal to create the electricity. So,
Right.
I don't know why they say that. I don't get it. So, that's it.
Well, how practical is the whole thing? You're right. You're right, Frank. I mean, all these EVs. I'm not against EVs. It's just that I think the problem is the power drain. Look at the data centers. Oh God, right, Tom? Don't talk about data centers right now. There's a revolution of sorts, maybe with a small r, where people are revolting against data centers because look what it's doing. Not only taking up the amount of the grid, and it's also putting in the necessity, which is so precious, and we're talking here in the West now, let me not be selfish, water's an important thing to everyone. I guess up in Canada, you're also concerned about water. And if the electric rates are so high, and look at the state of New Jersey, if I'm correct on this, Tom, before the current governor was elected, that whole gubernatorial campaign, so many people were just stressed out, rightfully so, about how electric rates were raising in New Jersey. But what about other states, right? It's a very interesting subject that we were talking about here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just on the first part of that, the head of Toyota told the Japanese government that if they converted more and more to electric vehicles, they'd eventually get to the point where they'd cause blackouts across the country. That they simply could not convert major part of the automobile industry to electric vehicles because there just simply wasn't enough electricity. And this is the head of Toyota, who actually have a very strong vested interest, of course, in being able to sell their EVs. And they said, look, government, it's not possible. You can't convert to EVs because there's not enough power. You'd have to build nuclear stations all over the place to make electricity.
Sure. Well, we appreciate you, Frank. Thank you for bringing some common sense points here to the audience in the Theater of the Mind, the Dr. Sky Experience. Line number 2, George in Westchester County. Good morning. You're on the air with Tom Harris. How are you doing this morning?
Dr. Sky and Mr. Harris, this show rocks the house. You guys are unbelievable. And I just like to, really, I love this kind of stuff. But the thing is, first of all, let me just throw a name out there that's never mentioned. What about astronaut Bruce McCandless II, and what he did 42 years ago, right?
Absolutely. He did that little man maneuvering unit, and he was the only astronaut, at least that I remember, that actually was away from the shuttle under the power of this little robotic chair, I guess, if you want to call it that. But you're spot on there. Continue on. This is interesting.
He had a steel set. But anyway, guys, the technology we have, and we put people on the moon, all our technology is always number one. But I just wonder, because when America becomes a third world country, we're not going to have this technology. This is going to be scrapped to the side. And you take a guy like Elon Musk. Everybody loves him in this audience. He voted for Trump in 24, but he voted for Joe Biden in 2020, and he also has a big auto plant in China. So to me, he's like a political free agent. Mm-hmm. But they don't realize when Omar and Cortez and all of them and Tlaib become really the most powerful people in the country through the third world, these programs are all going to be scrapped, private and public. They're going to go after everybody. And talking about colonizing, America will be colonized by the third world. You ain't seen nothing yet. That's why.
Well, you're giving us some information, but God help you're scaring us, because let me tell you, it could happen if people don't wake up. But let me go over to Tom for a response on that if he wants to respond. But you're right on. We want to make sure we keep American exceptionalism. But then again, your response, if you have one, Tom, to what was talked about by George.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was watching a Musk interview just a few hours ago, and he's very much concerned that America is going to change when you bring in so many cultures that are antithetical to Western civilization. And this has nothing to do with our climate topic, but I think it's a real concern. Are we going to see the United States become like Iran? I mean, if you bring in more and more people who believe in the things that Iran, or at least the leaders of Iran, believe in, you change the society. And, it's interesting because, and again, this has nothing to do with climate, but there's a couple of cities in the United States, I believe it's Dearborn, where they now have a majority of Muslims.
Right.
Of Muslims, that's right. And they're renaming streets after, various famous Muslim people who, in one case, he was actually in support of Hamas. And it was interesting because the mayor held a community meeting, and a white pastor stood up and said, look, I don't want my streets named after this character who supports Hamas. And the mayor apparently and the mayor told him, you are now in the minority. You are not welcome in this city. I'll have a parade the day you leave. Now, the interesting thing, and that was reported in the Detroit Free Press and all over the place.
You're 100% right, Tom. If this spreads to Canada, look, we don't want Sharia law in our town. We've covered this when I did shows long, long time ago on a thing called a call to rights. I mean, obviously, I couldn't be more pro-America. I mean, everybody else that's pro-America, you're my brother or sister. But the reality is, what was brought about by George is that maybe somehow in this country we'll realize that this is definitely, you take away my freedom and my liberty, and these are the two most important things. In other words, we're free. At least that's what we think. And our liberty, the freedom to make decisions, we don't want any of these large corporations. We don't want any of these large, massive data surges like China has. What? A credit score, not a credit score financially, but a personal one. Come on. Enough is enough, but my words are not going to do much other than people getting together. So, George in Westchester, you bring up the same theme, which is a positive one, but we want to stay on measure. Let's continue before the half hour runs out. Line 4, Anthony in Long Island. You've been patient, and you're on with Tom Harris. Good morning.
Gentlemen, the elephant in the room, respectfully. Our aging fleet of nuclear reactors were designed so long ago, and it was when they were licensed, they were to be shut down by 1996, and the waste stored in the Yucca Mountain. Well, Yucca Mountain has been deemed an unsafe repository for this waste, so they no longer have a go-to place to place it. And all these reactors have to upload a third of the fuel rods that are in them now to maintain their functionality. So thereby, they have been storing all this waste in the holding pools that are supposed to be for the waste that are in the transfer stage. So we have actually incrementally increase the waste, and then the breached reactors burn 600 times hotter than the sun. So what effect is that having on the Goldilocks zone of planet Earth? Because they knew, Oppenheimer, Einstein, they all wrote that this is a horrible thing to do to our genome, and if one reactor breaches containment with a meltdown, life on Earth is done. And that's where we're at. I mean,
you're spot on.
Japan is dumping radioactive water into the ocean as we speak.
Tom, your response on this one from Anthony, he's definitely on target with this, but it's an environmental issue, but it's a climate and, it's just a safe haven thing that he's talking about. What do you say about that? I mean, he brings up some very, very powerful things about nuclear waste. Where does it go? What do we do with it?
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a study called the Seaborne Commission study in Canada where they were considering putting nuclear waste a mile underground, encased in concrete, in the Canadian Shield. Now, this is a huge pluton. It's a massive geologic formation that hasn't moved in tens of millions of years. Now, the interesting thing is that you take a CANDU, which is a Canadian reactor, you take their CANDU reactor bundle, and it's high-level waste, and certainly it's dangerous, but it's only dangerous for about 400 years. You can hold it in your hands after only 400 years. So when people say, oh, it's dangerous for millions of years, they're talking about low-level waste, which is not particularly dangerous in the first place. So what we need is we need to put it into very solid, long-duration storage deep, deep in the ground. Now, the sad thing is, you say, well, why aren't we doing that already? I mean, we could be taking an American...
Exactly. Why not?
That's right. We could take an American nuclear waste and put it in the Canadian Shield as well. But the reason was this. The study said that technically and scientifically and from an engineering point of view, this was super, super safe because you only have to hold it for a blink of an eye in comparison with geologic time, during which time the shield has been very, very stable. But they said it wasn't socially or politically safe because most people thought that it was dangerous. So it's sad that they haven't built it because of this politically correct view that somehow it would be dangerous to put waste. Well, hey, it's a lot more dangerous to leave it on the surface, just like the caller was saying. Exactly. So we've got to go ahead with this deep geologic storage because it is very, very safe and certainly much safer than just leaving it on the surface. The only advantage of leaving it on the surface is that someday we may be able to use it in breeder reactors because, there's still lots of energy in that waste that can be extracted.
No, it has to be something where education campaigns are very strong for people. Don't let them think that all nuclear is no good, but on the same light, what Anthony brought to this table in the theater of the mind is very profound, because if Yucca Mountain, I know where it is, everybody seemingly knows, in the Nevada desert, you know, how much of that stuff can you pack into the ground? Because half-lives of some of this stuff goes way beyond the ages that we'll live. But we have to be concerned about this. Let's not pollute the earth in that regard with anything like nuclear waste. Very interesting. We're running up at the end of half of hour number 2 already. Isn't that amazing, Tom, how time flies in the space-time continuum? I just want to mention again, you can get Tom's website by going to, or I should say simply just go to his website, icsc-canada.com. And also tell us about your America Out Loud. What's the website? I mean, if I've given it, just tell us specifically how to get to your articles.
Yeah, sure. AmericaOutloud.news. And that is a very exciting website. I mean, they have some really exceptional writers. I don't know if I'm in that category, but certainly if they go and they search authors, they'll see my name there, and you can see our radio shows, and you can read my articles. And the radio shows are great fun, because we specifically called it The Other Side of the Story, because we like to take issues and look at it from a different point of view.
And it's good to listen to those, as you say, and it's not your, trademark quote. It's good to listen to people who don't agree with us, because how can you have critical thinking and dialogue if you do the other thing? We'll be right back here on the Dr. Sky Experience, what we like to call a theater of the mind. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, there's many seats that you still can come into the theater of the mind. 1-800-848-9222. Carl in New Jersey, if you're kind enough to stay with us, we will get you back on the air. And Jim, I guess you're calling back in the Catskills. Sorry we cut you off. And I think you might have heard it, Tom. Maybe some solar interference on some of the phone lines. Snap, crackle, and pop. But I think that's probably due to something out there in the cosmos. We'll be right back on the Dr. Sky Experience.
The Dr. Sky Experience is on the air. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Light travels billions of years, just so we can watch a star say goodbye. But in this darkness, every end is just the beginning of something beautiful.
We are all made of stardust. 32 minutes after the hour, we continue with Tom Harris as we move on to the conclusion of hour number 2. And we ask you kindly to stay in touch with us for Saturday into Sunday morning as we talk on the Dr. Sky Experience in our Theater of the Mind with a company called Reflect Orbital and their CEO as we talk about space capitalism and their design of space mirrors. This is a young company that has funding and has many plans that are going to do some things that are interesting, somewhat controversial to some, but stay tuned to the Dr. Sky Experience on Reflect Orbital and space capitalism. Tom Harris, thank you for continuing to be with us. Let's go to line number, whatever it is. I don't even see the line number. Let's go to Carl in New Jersey. Carl, you're on with Tom Harris. Thanks. Good morning.
Hello, gentlemen. Regarding the area of energy, sources of energy, what comes to mind is the research going on at Lawrence Livermore, where they're able to produce more energy out than going in fusion process. And also MIT has a group working on cold fusion. And also cars are being manufactured now that are running on hydrogen fuel cells, which means getting it from water.
Interesting.
So, yeah. So that should be addressed in a big way, and maybe some major funding should go to some of these different sources of energy. This is not burning gasoline, so in that case, there's no problem with fossil fuels and things of that nature.
Carl, I appreciate you. It's not your fault. We're hearing a little bit of static in a lot of the callers out there, but I think most of us can at least hear the question. You're right. Hydrogen is something, Tom, that weren't there a few cars, a couple of big manufacturers, mainstream, the major car manufacturers, weren't they doing hydrogen cars? And somehow it evaporated. Am I right?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting because when it's around freezing, the byproduct of burning hydrogen, of course, is water. And so they found that it was actually slicking the highways with ice. So there are issues with hydrogen cars. And, of course, you have to make the hydrogen somehow. Typically, they might dissociate water. Or they might, reform methane. That's a typical way of making hydrogen. But, I wanted to comment on Carl's point about the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I mean, sure. That is one of the biggest physics milestones of the century. I mean, that is so, so important. The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, they're in the news because it's the first place on Earth to achieve what they call scientific fusion ignition. That means that they produce more energy from fusion than the laser energy delivered to the fuel. So
right, even though it's a tiny, tiny amount, though, I understand, to set the record straight. I mean, it's it just appeared and then it kind of disappeared, or is it some storable thing? Right.
They only hold it for tiny fractions. I believe it's only holding fractions of a second. But I mean, the bottom line is in December 2022, I'm just reading it from the web here, they produced 3.14 megajoules of fusion energy from 2.05 of laser energy delivered to the fuel capsule. And that's the first time humanity's ever had a net energy gain from controlled fusion. So, I mean, fusion is super worthwhile continuing to work on. I mean, if we ever have fusion, we will have energy forever. It'll be clean energy. This will be an absolutely wonderful thing. The unfortunate thing is that Princeton, for example, puts out a T-shirt saying that we're only 10 years from nuclear fusion. It's controlled to actually make electricity, but they put out that same T-shirt every 10 years. So, the fellow I used to work with, a Princeton PhD, Jay Lair, he's passed away now. He thinks that we're still quite a long way. I mean, many decades from a time when we can have fusion powering actual electricity generation. But wow, we better keep working on it. And this announcement that Carl brought up, yeah, it is a big, big deal.
And what if we could go back into the 1920s when one of the physicists at the time, we'll spare the name right now, who was developing and working on the concept, not developing, but working on the concept of antimatter. Could you imagine if you had an antimatter event where you could utilize the energy? But tell us this. It's really too much of an uncontrolled environment explosion. So they're saying if you had a tiny little bit of antimatter and it was used incorrectly, it could wipe out like a whole city. I mean, it's that much where you don't have the controls. It's like your foot, you don't have a ability to put the brakes on that one. But imagine that, though. In the universe, there's still that reality that antimatter is there, but we just have to go ahead and figure out how to do fusion first. Carl in New Jersey,
right.
If you're still there, Carl, sorry to cut you short. Do you have a follow-up, or did you disappear into the ether?
Oh, no. It just really amazed me to discover that they finally achieved the point where they were able to get more energy out than input.
That's amazing.
Amazing kind of thing. Hey, what about the idea of fission being used now in space rockets, as a matter of fact?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it planned that nuclear fission will be used on board one of the rockets going to Mars?
I don't know that. Do you have that information on that, Tom? Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when John Kennedy announced that we were going to land a man on the moon and return him safely to the Earth, a lot of people don't realize, but the latter part of that speech was, in fact, that we had to develop nuclear power for spacecraft, for propulsion.
Project Nerva, right. Project Nerva.
Yeah, that's right, because currently it's about 7 months to get to Mars with chemical rockets, because, of course, most of the time you're just coasting. And then you have to, stay there for a certain period of time. I believe it's about 5 months until the planets are lined up, and another 7-month trip back. And that's a very close planet. It's a very close destination, seen from a cosmological point of view. So, I mean, we have to get much, much better propulsion. Nuclear propulsion was the original goal, and they're getting back to working on it now. So I can see that this will be, and of course, with nuclear propulsion, you can have a gradual but continuous thrust over a period of months. It doesn't just burn for a few minutes and then coast. So, yeah, nuclear fusion and fission, both of them are wonderful sources of power. And if we can get our spacecraft operating on them, who knows, it may open up a large part of the galaxy.
Carla, New Jersey, thank you for being part of the show. We do appreciate you. We'll go to Jim again. I'm sorry, Jim, in the Catskills, if you're there. Did we get cut off or somehow you got lost?
Yeah.
So you're back. Go ahead, please.
I got cut off. Thank you, Dr. Sky. Well, with the electric cars, yeah, I realize the solar panel would only be a little bit. But what about alternators on each wheel to keep recharging the battery, even if it's not completely, to keep it to a higher state of charge if it does need to be recharged?
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know much about that, but I do know that with some cars you get energy back when you're braking. Isn't that right?
Right. I've heard that also.
Well, guys, isn't that the concept? No, excuse me. Isn't that the concept when we have a hybrid vehicle that as you're driving the vehicle, it's what? Charging the battery, if I'm correct in that assessment. Isn't that right?
I would think, but it still has to be recharged.
Right.
But my second one, which really concerns me, is Elon Musk. You notice his personality, how he has that aloofness, you know what I mean? So he's been diagnosed of have Asperger's, high on the spectrum.
Absolutely.
He's known to have an irrational temper. People that he worked with say the same thing. And people with Asperger's lack empathy. So now you have the world's richest man racing for, super intelligence who's creating millions of robots to replace human labor. Then there's another factor also. He's very close to his mother. And his mother, I've read, practices a version of... that she practices a South African version of Luciferian witchcraft.
Oh, wow.
And that also one of Elon Musk's former wives, Grimes, Gothic singer, she practiced Luciferian witchcraft. Elon Musk was at a gala with his mother. It was like a Halloween thing. But he had a red vest on with like a very elaborate picture of a Baphomet demon on the front and an upside down cross on the back. That concerns me.
Well, it does me too. You're right. I mean, Jim, who knows? I mean, obviously we read this stuff. I don't know him. You don't personally know him, but you're right. I mean, when you're in that capacity, I don't know how he does all the things he does and stays sane, but I guess he's also involved in doing mushrooms and I don't know. I've heard ketamine and all these other things, but God bless. If he's going to build rockets and do things in space, I think the overall thing is he's moved us, right, Tom, on the chessboard. He's moved the parts far away from what we were doing before.
And he has a goal, I think, which more people in the space program should have. He says he wants to preserve the light of consciousness so that humans will become eventually, not immortal and not, we will still die, but will, as a species, we expand far enough into, that's right. If we expand far enough into space and we use proper technology, we could make humanity as a whole last a lot longer than if we all stay in this little pot. So, I mean, I think his goal of bringing consciousness to the universe, keeping the light of consciousness going by expanding into space, that's exactly what Charles Laughlin says. I mean, Charles Laughlin, the anthropologist, he says the single most important activity for humankind in the 21st century will be the establishment of permanent, self-sufficient off-world presence. He says that is key if we are to have a functioning and prosperous world and even survive for that matter.
Jim in the Catskills, thanks for calling back. And again, we're hearing a little bit of solar flare activity. I don't know that for sure, but if you're coming through the phone line, we have no idea why. But again, our helmsmen, Bill and Ian, they're doing a yeoman's job of getting that thing solved, and we do appreciate their help, because without them, imagine what kind of show we would have where we couldn't hear what you folks have to say. When we come back in just a moment for the last break of the 2-hour show, we're going to shift gears a little bit. Tom and I have at least decided to talk about some other things. The historic Apollo 11, which, of course, many people were not even born that are listening to this radio station now. Wherever you are, a most amazing achievement. I still can't believe, Tom, how people believe that we never went there. The simple answer, I'm looking at it on my desk, and I don't think it's photoshopped, is the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, which is out here in Arizona State. There's an office there, and they have a little kind of a mini control panel there. It's a small little unit, a satellite, like the size of maybe a little refrigerator. But I'm holding in my hand the imaging of the Apollo 11 landing site and the long walk that Neil Armstrong took. You can still see the footprints to the little west
wow.
crater. Amazing.
That's awesome.
So you can check that out by going on the web. Go to Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And Tom, Time and Space controls the show. And we will be right back on the Dr. Sky Experience as we move to the conclusion of hour number 2. We'll be right back.
This is the Dr. Sky Experience. Always look to the sky. 77 WABC. Now, here's Dr. Sky.
Hi, this is Hugh Downs. You're listening to Dr. Sky on aviation and space and life.
I neither think I know, nor think I know at all. A quote about humility and truth from the great Socrates a long time ago. 48 minutes after the hour, we continue with Tom Harris, Executive Director, the International Climate Science Coalition. Check his website, icsc-canada.com. Wanted to do a quick review of the Apollo 11. You know where you are. I was 13. I think I know where I was. I was home. My parents, I had to have permission to stay up late at night on the East Coast. It was near 11 p.m., but the interesting truth is, what an experience, because, you know, I spent some time with Buzz Aldrin, and he told me a story, and it's actually come to light, that when they got back into the lunar, the module to do the ascent stage, he had backed up inadvertently into the breaker panel and broke the little switch for the button switch or whatever, where you would then launch the rocket to get off the surface of the moon. So lo and behold, he didn't tell that to Houston, and they're ready for the countdown. And what does he do, Tom? He takes out a felt-tip pen and shoves it in the hole, and the rest is history. And that pen supposedly was at auction. I don't know if it's Sotheby's. I think it went for over $300,000. And when they were coming down the ladder, that is Neil Armstrong, he reminded Buzz Aldrin not to close the door on the lunar module because it theoretically could have locked. Now, those are some amazing stories. But your analysis of that whole experience, it's just amazing. I don't see how people even say that we never went there. I mean, come on. Well, they had 25,000 people. 25,000 people worked on the Apollo. So are they all lying? But I mean, I've had dinner with Harrison Schmitt, who was the only scientist to walk on the moon, a PhD in geology on Apollo 17. Sure. And to think that all these guys are lying, I just don't buy it. The Apollo moon landing was an amazing activity. I mean, I was 16 at the time. I collected all the newspapers, and I still have them from all over the world, actually. And I met, as I say, several of the Apollo astronauts. They're very, very brave people because, they had one rocket to get them off the moon. If it didn't work, they were stuck. And I don't believe they had any ability to get them to actually rescue them. Well, President Nixon had a backup speech, and we interviewed the gentleman, too, not to go through the time tunnel here, that wrote the plaque, here men from the earth came, in peace and landed on the moon. We had that gentleman before he passed, a speechwriter. But President Nixon had a backup speech, which would be very depressing if indeed that door was locked or somehow something happened catastrophically. A great event in time, but let's go to the few callers that we have. We always want to go to the callers. If he's still there, line number 2, Steve in New Jersey. Thanks for your patience. If you're on there, good morning to you. How you doing? Steve in New Jersey, give it one more time.
Hello, Dr. Sky. Hello, Mr. Harris. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Great. All right. Mr. Harris, I've had a hypothesis for years. I want to run by you. All right. Now, I never bought into the global climate change, and Dr. Sky, I always saw it as a way to control us, take away our freedom. All right.
You bet.
Having said that, Mr. Harris, I believe if we detonated every nuke on the planet, we would destroy man and all the structures and the atmosphere on the planet, but we wouldn't destroy the Earth. The Earth would still continue to exist. The atmosphere would be screwed up for a while, but eventually, due to either act of God, which I believe, or forces of nature, the atmosphere and the planet would return to a normal state. If there'd be life, I don't know. But what do you think about my hypothesis? What do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not an experiment I want to see tried, but they're saying that there's some insects that would survive, cockroaches, for example. So, we'd have a very different ecosystem, that's for sure. I grew up at a time during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I remember my dad had, between the wall of our house in the basement and the oil tank, he had a little sort of bomb shelter, and he had lots of food stored up and everything else. And thank goodness it never actually happened, so we were very glad that Kennedy and Khrushchev came to their agreement, but I just, concerning one thing that Dr. Sky brought up, and that is that people have got to go to the Air and Space Museum in Washington because they have the lunar module there.
Yeah.
And they even have the command module of the Apollo 11, the actual spacecraft. They have
And
Neil
the
Armstrong.
spacesuit. Yeah, the spacesuit that's so dirty because all that lunar dust is not very compatible unless you use OxyClean to clean it, right? There you go.
Yeah. I know it's not the topic that was just brought up, but it's something
It's
people
all right.
have got to go to. And it's free. It's free.
I like that. Well, thank you, Steve. You bring in some insight as always, and that's why we love the callers that come into this, what we call the theater of the mind. Almost out of time here, but I wanted to bring up something else that you talk about all the time, about what's really going on in the world of climate, and you're a climate realist. I want to say that again. His website, icsc-canada.com. You can learn so much more. America Out Loud, the other websites that you were talking about. But here's something interesting from the world of astronomy. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. Hear about this. This is interesting. LHS 1140b is the first rocky Earth-like exoplanet discovered to have an atmosphere in a star's habitable zone. It's 48 light years away and features, get a load of this, a helium-rich upper atmosphere. So it's about 70% larger than the Earth, 5.6 times heavier, and it circles a very dim red dwarf star. So here's what's interesting. Can you imagine if we do really confirm this, the first time in history, humankind, that we've actually seen something that may have a potentially habitable planet, which means there may be water there. Your thoughts? I don't know if you were aware of this discovery, but it's 48 light years away. Not that we're going to get there anytime soon, but it gives hope alive to another subject off the topic that we're talking about the possibility of life existing in the universe with the number of stars based on a mathematical equation called the Drake equation. What say you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know anything about that particular discovery, but the water is almost certainly under the pack ice on the moon Europa, which is one of the moons of Jupiter. In fact, Arthur Clarke wrote a very good fiction, actually, called "The Sea in the Sky," about astronauts that went to Europa, and they went through the ice into what was, in fact, an under ice ocean, and that's what they speculate is going to be found when they actually can get through the ice. And if it's actually liquid water, and it very probably is, they say there'll be more water there than on the whole of the Earth. So, and it's kept liquid partly because of the tidal forces from Jupiter. So, yeah, there may be life, who knows, in our own solar system. And when we get to Europa with our robots and stuff, we're going to perhaps find it.
Well, Arthur C. Clarke said it, and I know we don't have a lot of time to go through it. He did say in the 2010 sequel, at least it came through in the movie, what did they say, Tom? Don't touch Europa. It was supposed to be a sacred place. But you're right. The probe that's headed there is not going to land. It's going to actually survey and do some analysis. But one day, hopefully, we'll find out what lies underneath this, because it's improbable, in my opinion, that with all the number of stars out there and sun-like stars, and now this discovery of LHS 1140b, this could be something really interesting. Can you imagine if you just multiply that by so many other stars and systems where planetary objects exist? We're all stardust, as you're hearing in some of those little promotionals by the voice. How about that voice of whoever's doing that?
Well, you know, Arthur C. Clarke also had a perspective that because you have to not just be close enough to extraterrestrial life to detect it, you also have to exist at the same time. You know, and humanity's only been Cro-Magnon, or about 300,000 years ago, which is a blink of an eye in the history of the universe. So we have to overlap with other life forms. They have to exist at the same time as us. And so one of the conclusions that Arthur Clarke came to was a pessimistic conclusion, but I think it's probably realistic. He said, among intelligent life in the universe, and he felt there would be other intelligent life, probably the most common characteristic is loneliness, because we may never actually overlap in time with when they exist. So I think that it's going to be a long time before we ever, if ever, discover extraterrestrial intelligence. But, yeah, let's keep looking.
Well, absolutely, and you hear many hosts on this radio station talk about it in great depth about this whole UFO experience and what's happening with the government releasing all the data. But I want to be an optimist. I mean, I've studied the subject. I've known so many of the abductees, from Travis Walton to Betty of the Betty Hill experience. This is the most documented UFO case, but still, Where's the one bit of credible evidence that shows anything to date? I mean, it's like we're looking at things by people telling us stories. Many of them have passed on. But show me one credible shred of evidence. Let me see a piece for something. Let me see some weird hieroglyphics or good hieroglyphics. Let's do some analysis. And what about what David Grush is talking about, right? Way off our subject.
Yeah. I used to discount that sort of thing entirely, but I don't anymore. You know, I'm starting to see when we look at the videos that have just been released, and just a few days ago there was an amazing series of videos that were released showing things that look like spacecraft, quite frankly. I'm now saying that, okay, I'll listen to David Grush and others because I'm not dismissing them. I think who knows, they may be right. I have a friend who was a CSIS agent, which is like your CIA, and he says that there's a lot of evidence that we are, in fact, being visited by extraterrestrials right now. And, you know, I don't know if that's true. I don't necessarily believe it, but I have a lot of respect for this guy. So who knows? It might be true.
Thank you, Tom Harris. ICSC-Canada.com. You're always welcome here in the Theater of the Mind, and by the number of people that call in and take a seat. We do appreciate your time. We'll have you back and keep us in the know here about these things, about, as you talk about, very sincerely and straight, not a climate denier, but a climate realist. Thank you for your time. We'll talk soon. You have a good morning up in Canada. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
And stay tuned to Talk Radio 77 WABC for another side of midnight as Lionel takes us to the break of dawn as he talks about many fascinating subjects as we continue to talk about the mysteries not only of the universe, but what about mysteries in general and answers that we seek. And thanks to our helmsmen, Bill and Ian, for navigating the airwaves and getting you, ladies and gentlemen, on the air. We'll see you tomorrow with a whole new edition of the Dr. Sky Experience, Theater of the Mind. Have a good week.